I met Claire on a rainy Tuesday evening at a small diner outside Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place where the coffee was always hot and nobody cared if you sat alone for 3 hours. I had gone there after work because I didn't want to go straight home to an empty apartment. Claire was sitting 2 booths away, staring at a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She looked exhausted, but not in the way someone looks after a long day. She looked like someone who hadn't slept peacefully in a long time. When the waitress accidentally brought her check to my table, Claire laughed for the first time. "Apparently you owe me $23, she said. I smiled and handed her the check. "Only if you promise not to order anything else." That small joke turned into a conversation, and somehow, we spent the next 2 hours talking. Claire told me she worked at a local hospital, lived alone, and didn't have much family nearby. She didn't tell me much about her past, and I didn't push. A week later, we met again. Then again. Soon, seeing her became the best part of my week. She was funny, thoughtful, and strangely careful about everything she said. One night, while we were sitting in my car outside her apartment, I noticed her phone light up. Her smile disappeared. She turned the screen face down. "Everything okay?" I asked. She nodded too quickly. "Yeah. Just someone I don't want to hear from." I didn't ask who. Instead, I said, "Your past doesn't scare me." She stared at me for several seconds. Then she whispered, "You don't know it yet." I laughed softly, thinking she was being dramatic. But she wasn't smiling. The next morning, I found an envelope tucked under my apartment door. There was no stamp, no return address, and only my name written across the front. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Claire standing beside a man I had never seen before. On the back, someone had written 6 words, "Ask her why he disappeared." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then my phone rang. It was Claire. "Did you get something?" she asked. My stomach dropped. "How do you know?" There was silence on the other end. Then she said, "Because I was hoping they wouldn't find you yet." Claire arrived at my apartment 20 minutes later, soaked from the rain and breathing like she had run the entire way. The moment I opened the door, she looked past me toward the hallway, then locked the door behind her. "Where's the photograph?" she asked. I handed it to her. Her face went pale. "His name was Daniel," she said. "He was my fiancé." I didn't know what to say. Claire sat down and stared at the photograph in her hands. She told me Daniel had disappeared 3 years earlier after they ended their engagement. Everyone believed he had left town because he was facing financial problems, but Claire knew something was wrong. The night before he vanished, Daniel had called her and said someone was threatening him. He promised to explain everything the next morning. He never showed up. Police investigated, but without evidence, the case eventually went cold. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Because every man who gets close to me eventually becomes part of this story." I wanted to reassure her, but before I could answer, someone knocked on my door. 3 slow knocks. Claire froze. Another knock followed. I moved toward the door, but she grabbed my arm. "Don't." Her voice was barely audible. "Please don't open it." We stood silently until footsteps moved away. I waited another minute before checking through the peephole. Nobody was there. But something had been left on the floor. A small brown envelope. Claire didn't want me to touch it. "That's how it started with Daniel," she whispered. "Messages. Photographs. Warnings." I opened the envelope anyway. Inside was a photocopy of a bank statement. One transaction was circled in red. The account belonged to Daniel, and the transfer had been made 2 days after his disappearance. Claire stared at the page. "That account was supposed to be closed," she said. "Whoever made that transfer knew something only Daniel and I knew." I looked at the date again. Then I noticed the destination account. It belonged to a company Claire recognized immediately. Her expression changed completely. That can't be possible. I asked why. She swallowed hard. Because that company belonged to my father. I remembered what she'd told me about her family, that they lived several states away and barely spoke anymore. Now I understood why she'd been so careful. Her past wasn't simply following her. Someone from inside her own family had been watching her. Then my phone buzzed. An unknown number had sent one message: "You should have listened to Claire." I showed Claire the message, and for the first time since I had met her, she stopped trying to hide how frightened she was. "We need to leave," she said. "Right now." We drove to a small motel outside town and checked in under my name. Claire barely spoke during the drive. Once we were inside, she finally told me what she had never told anyone. Daniel hadn't disappeared because of debt. He had discovered that Claire's father had been secretly moving money through several businesses and using Daniel's name on financial documents. Daniel confronted him and threatened to expose everything. Claire's father warned him to stay quiet. 2 days later, Daniel vanished. "Why didn't you go to the police?" I asked. Claire looked down. "I did. But the evidence disappeared." She reached into her bag and pulled out an old notebook. Inside were dates, account numbers, names, and handwritten notes. Daniel had given it to her the night before he disappeared. She had kept it hidden for 3 years. I asked why she suddenly trusted me with it. She said, "Because they already know about you. You're involved whether you want to be or not." That sentence stayed with me. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer I knew through work. I didn't tell him everything over the phone, but I showed him the photograph and bank statement. He immediately told us not to confront anyone. He also suggested checking whether the company connected to Claire's father had recently made any unusual transactions. We did. One transfer stood out. It had been made to a storage facility in our county. The payment description contained Daniel's initials. Claire stared at the screen. "That facility didn't exist when Daniel disappeared," she said. We drove there that afternoon. The manager checked the records and found a unit rented under a name neither of us recognized. But the emergency contact number belonged to Claire's younger brother, Michael. Claire's hands began shaking. Michael had always claimed he knew nothing about Daniel's disappearance. We asked the manager to open the unit with the police present. Inside was an old laptop, several boxes of financial records, and a sealed envelope addressed to Claire. She opened it with trembling hands. Daniel had written the letter 3 years earlier. He said he knew he might disappear, and if Claire ever found the envelope, she needed to understand one thing: the person you trust most is the one who knows where everything is buried. Claire looked at me. "That's my brother." Then the laptop suddenly powered on. A video file appeared on the screen, dated the night Daniel vanished. The video showed Daniel sitting alone in a dim office, looking directly into the camera. His voice was calm, but his hands were shaking. He explained that he had discovered his future father-in-law was hiding money through shell companies, but he also admitted something worse: Michael had helped him. Daniel said Michael had initially promised to expose their father, but when the money became involved, he changed his mind. The final minutes of the recording showed Michael entering the room. Daniel confronted him about the missing documents, and Michael admitted he had taken them. But he also said he never intended for Daniel to disappear. Someone else had arranged that. Before the recording ended, Daniel mentioned a name Claire recognized immediately. It was a former business partner of her father's. The police reopened the investigation, and the evidence from the storage unit finally gave them something concrete to work with. The financial records matched transactions from years earlier, and the video established that Daniel had been threatened before he disappeared. Weeks later, investigators located Daniel living under another name in a different state. He had survived, but after years of fear, he had chosen to stay away rather than return to the family that had betrayed him. When Claire finally spoke to him, she didn't ask why he had abandoned her. She simply said, "I thought you were dead." Daniel answered, "I thought coming back would put you in danger." Eventually, the truth about Claire's father and his business partner became public, while Michael agreed to cooperate with investigators. Claire's family fell apart, but for the first time, she wasn't carrying the secret alone. Months later, Claire and I sat in the same diner where we had first met. She looked different not because anything about her appearance had changed, but because she no longer seemed afraid of every sound behind her. "You still think my past doesn't scare you?" she asked with a small smile. I looked at her and said, "Your past never scared me. What scared me was watching you carry it by yourself." She reached across the table and held my hand. We didn't make promises about forever. We didn't need to. Some people enter your life carrying wounds they didn't create. You can't erase their past, and you can't fix everything for them. Sometimes, all you can do is stay when leaving would be easier. And that night, when Claire finally smiled without looking over her shoulder, I realized that was enough.